We're on.
Great.
So thank you, Dharmadas ji, for being willing to submit yourself to a non-music chat like this. I think the traditional way to start off is just by asking a little bit of background that people might not know.
I grew up in the Chicago area, although I was born in Missouri, I think primarily for the reason that I can now say I'm from Missouri, show me. But that's the motto of Missouri apparently. But I was only there briefly. We were my twin sister and I are my twin sister and I. So growing up with a 10-minute younger sister and a 6-year younger sister
Huh.
kept me kind of limber in social skills. We were both musical. We both studied the piano. We both studied another instrument. I did the French horn. She did the violin. We both picked difficult instruments. Not just difficult to play, but difficult to listen to when you don't play well. So I think we were something of a torture to our families in some ways, but we were sincere. But the music part never left me. I was the one in the family who could play by ear. If I heard something, I could just sit down and play it, more or less. I mean, not some, Rachmaninoff or something, but I mean, just if I heard a melody, I could sit down and work out what is that? How do you play that with your fingers on the piano? The choral music and the church music in general, we were a Protestant, we were Lutheran denomination. Music was a big, big deal in that church. It was not small potatoes. My dad was the president of the church council during a time when there was a movement to get a real pipe organ installed in the church. And he actually opposed it, even though he himself is a music lover, not particularly musical, but a music lover. And his reasoning was it's too expensive. And he was outvoted. And a $65,000 pipe organ. Now, mind you, this is in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. They tore up the church to do it. They had to install all these pipes all the way through the floor of the church. So for 3 months or something, we had services in the basement of the church. And when that thing was done, they brought a guy from Germany to do the installation. When that thing was done, the entire church rumbled. You felt it viscerally, and it just was deeply moving to me. I don't know. It was thrilling to me to have all this sound. I suppose it was my way of experiencing Om as a kid. I just loved it. It was absolutely thrilling.
Did your dad come to accept it?
Oh yeah, he did. He did. I've never really talked with him much since then about it, but yeah, he did enjoy it. He was too much of a music lover to not enjoy it. It sort of ran counter to his kind of charitable instincts. He thought the money should have been allocated in more charitable ways. And, I can see both sides of that argument. But, I fight against the acoustics here in our church, which to me is like singing into a pillow. Like, yeah, let's have an inspiring experience. Let's all just stuff pillows in front of our faces and sing into them, how do you get inspired with that? It's just really hard. You go to a church in Europe, and the ceiling is 100 feet high or more, whatever. It's way up there. And, one voice, and it's echoing through this hall. And it's like your spirit just goes up. It's like the energy just goes up in your spine. Coming to Ananda, it was the music that told me I was home. And Swami's music in particular. I heard Walk Like a Man, which was called Go On Alone back then. And I knew on a deep level, that music just spoke right to my depths. So I used to, it was years before anybody but just a handful were really singing Swami's music. It wasn't really until the oratorio in 83, 84 that a significant part of the community was actually singing Swami's music. Many of us were chanting, from the get-go. My musical piano keyboard background and playing by ear meant that if somebody sang a chant, I could just sit down and play it, and usually pretty well right off. I mean, I would look at the music sometimes to check up and make sure I wasn't goofing something up, get the words right. But so chanting was also important, and right from the get-go, right from the first week at Ananda, I was playing a harmonium and chanting. I didn't own one for a little while, but yeah, I was definitely tuning into chanting.
Okay, so tell us how you got to Ananda for that first week. From
So I was in college, and I was getting interested in yoga. I had been interested in yoga and meditation before in high school, but I didn't have the patience for it, and I didn't have the natural kind of instinctive understanding that, you know what, kid, this is going to take a little time. You've wound yourself into a pretzel over the span of 16 or 17 years. It's going to take a little while to unwind it, to get you limber and to just kind of get into the groove of it, into the flow of it. When I was in college, I took up yoga seriously, and I took a book that was a 28-day guide to yoga, and I thought, all right, I'm going to put a month into this. That was my willingness to commit to, okay, I will do this now for 28 straight days, and I did. And wow, by the end of it, I was hooked. I mean, it was like, oh, okay, this is something. This is worth digging into. So I did, but that was around Christmas of that year in 1979, 78 Christmas, and then moving into 79, and by the end of that year, or by March of that year, I was ready for something more, something new, and I found the path. And so I read Swami's book, The Path, and that's what got me on the path. And so then it was, and then I read Autobiography of a Yogi, kind of an amusing experience prior to that I picked it up, looked at it, thought, well, I don't know who he is. Like, I was some expert. I was aware of two Indian gurus. I had heard of Vivekananda and I had heard of Meher Baba. That was my list. That was my total list of Indian gurus. And Yogananda was not on that list, so it was like, well, I don't know who he is, so I put it back. So then I read The Path, and it was like, oh my God. And then I read Autobiography of a Yogi, and I really drank it in. I really took it in. So then I knew I had to come to Ananda. I had to dedicate my life to this search. And so I did. I came to Ananda in the fall of 79, late summer of 79. It was a really deep connection. I left behind, in a sense, I didn't leave much behind. I mean, I was only 19. But on another level, it was like I left everything that I knew behind. I left my family. I left the trajectory in college. I was sort of headed towards a medical school track. But in a sense, I had been on the path my whole life because I was very connected to the church and asking tons of questions, very inconvenient questions too. What happens to my Jewish friend after he dies? For a Lutheran, oh man, that's, all kinds of interesting territory with that.
what was Ananda like when you first came? For those who haven't ever experienced early Ananda like you did, what would you say?
Well, Ananda in the 70s was a lot of dust or mud, depending on the time of year. The dust became mud in the winter, and it came back to dust again in the summer, late spring. Very humble beginnings. I spent my first 2 months in a tent. I spent my next 6 or 8 months in a teepee, other than going off to do a construction project where I was living in a house with other devotee construction workers. And we had a devotee construction company, so I was working with Guru Bhais. But It was very rustic and extremely joyful. You know, as a kid growing up in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood in the suburbs of Chicago, um, I was used to things working and, having conveniences of flush toilets and stuff like that. Electricity that you can just flick a switch and it's there. You never really think about stuff like that. At Ananda, I had to think about it because I had none of those things. My first building project at Ananda, was in the building trades for 15 years or so. But my first project was building a shower house in the area near Master's Kitchen, and in downtown Ananda, quote downtown Ananda, and it was a big deal having a flush toilet and a shower house with a concrete floor, and it was like this was a real wow. This is a big deal.
What was your first meeting with Swamiji? What was your impression back when?
Um, my first meeting with him was just to see him waving out the window of a car on his way to Europe for 3 months to lecture. And so, it was just disappointing. I really had wanted to meet him then. So that didn't happen. At Christmas time, 3 months later, when he was back, I finally got to shake hands with him and introduce myself, which I did. And we didn't talk. We were in a large room full of people at the Common Dome at the meditation retreat. I got Kriya a month later, which again was not a personal meeting, but at least I had that connection with him, and I was very grateful to get Kriya. I got it a little early, it was only after 4 or 5 months, as opposed to the usual, 10 to 12 months that it takes now. But he didn't give another Kriya that year until, I want to say, Spiritual Renewal Week. And so, 6, 7 months later, that was a long time for me. That would have been a big deal to wait. So I was thrilled to get it then. But I didn't actually meet him to talk to until about July of the next year, of 1980. So this came in late 79. 10 months went by before I actually sat down and talked with him. And that was a pivotal meeting. I felt the need to really connect with him and try to understand on some level who was he and how should we relate to each other. And so that was my first question to him, is how should we be? How should we relate to each other? And he surprised me. He answered by saying, well, I'm not a master. And how your mind can fill in afterwards a kind of narrative or whatever. The narrative in my mind that I didn't have time to think of was, well, I didn't ask you that. I just asked, what should we do? So I didn't say anything. He said that, I didn't say anything. And he said, think of me as a friend and counselor. And so I said, okay, I can do that. That'll work. And he was being honest in his way and not presuming anything. He could have said to me, I will be your guru, and I would have accepted that too, but I wouldn't have known what it meant, really, at the time, other than what little I had read of Autobiography of a Yogi and The Path. But that wasn't ever his way, so he didn't. And he let me grow into it. It was a brief conversation, challenging conversation, because he was not feeling very well, and he, I think, was a little fed up with people kind of coming and sort of approaching him like, Swamiji, fill my little begging bowl, please, I beg you. And he just, it wasn't that I was doing that, but my energy was a kind of taking energy at that time. I just didn't know any better. And finally it just occurred to me. So, I would ask him a question. I was hoping he would just expound, he would just talk and talk and talk. Well, he didn't. And so it was very annoying. I would ask a question and he would say yes and stop. And then he would say no and then stop. It was like, I didn't want to carry the conversation. So I finally just said, well, is there some way that I can help you? And then the energy
Uh-huh.
shifted. And and he became more talkative, and we just had a very nice connection.
Great.
So it, yeah, it was
Yeah,
sweet.
one wonders if he was training you or feeding you certain energy or thoughts just based on what he perceived in you. I mean, what's your view of it in hindsight?
Um, I think he was entirely capable of that. Um, I could never, even after living with him for 5 or 6 years and being closely traveling with him for 2 or 3 more after that and before that, um, I could never entirely predict what was in his mind at any given moment or why he would do a certain thing, except that you could see later, but his was not always a, step B, step C kind of rational process. I think he just operated on the basis of energy. And he watched people's energy. And so seeing the energy that I brought out a certain energy in him. And I think that kind of thing was instinctive for him. I don't think he sat and kind of thought it all through. I think the rational process for him was much too slow. It was just too cumbersome for him. He would do it if he had to. He could analyze numbers, he could reason things out when he needed to, but usually that was kind of more a justification for something that he already felt inside and was trying to sort of explain it to other people
Yeah,
or something, or just check it in with himself. But yeah.
like Einstein explaining the theory of relativity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. But I do believe that he was capable of knowing what we were thinking, or he could intuitively understand us. I really felt that. He had been around thousands of people by that time in terms of serving and teaching and sharing. And it's interesting. He was 30 years on the path, 31, 32 years on the path by the time I came. And yeah, he'd had, those were a really packed 31 or 32 years, so he was pretty deeply into it at that point. Yeah.
Well, let's segue back to the music part of it. So I'll just personal share. I've always appreciated your treatment of music in that just to me, the only word I can think of is egoless. It's just very supportive of what's happening. The comparison I used to make before Ananda was Ringo Starr. Had the same quality where his drumming just always supported whatever the song needed. And
Yeah.
it didn't draw attention to him. It just supported what was trying to happen in the larger group. And so whether it's philosophy and song group, or other endeavors, I've just always appreciated your guitar playing and singing in being very supportive of the group around. So thank
Okay.
you for that.
Yeah.
And just tell me a little bit about how you came into the music at Ananda and what it all meant.
Well, I came into it from love. It would be the quickest way or the simplest way to say it. I just loved that music. Swamiji's music just spoke to me, and I would take a tape. That was the era of cassette tapes. I'd take a tape and I'd play it till it died. I'd wear it out, and yeah, in those days, getting into the music meant getting into one of two singing groups. Well, actually, in the beginning, when I first came, there was only one singing group. It was the Gandharvas, and you couldn't really join that group. I mean, it was invitation only, and nobody was getting invited.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really like you could sign up on a waiting list or something. There was no concept for that. It was just people that knew music, and Swamiji sort of drew together. But as the 80s went along, and especially as we got into the oratorio era, where a lot of Ananda began singing in the oratorio choir, then Swamiji really, had begun to work with the music more. He bought a music synthesizer, a music processor, in a sense, connected to this keyboard, and that's how he began working with the oratorio to get the music notated so that people could read it and follow it. And so that was a big change. But there came a point where there were two singing groups. The Joy Singers, which was kind of the performing group that were, quasi-professional. They would go out and sing for churches and go out on tour along the West Coast. And I kind of aspired to be in that group, but I didn't, there was no direct path to that group. But when that second group came up, which was kind of the home group, the group that would sing at Ananda Village, then I signed up to try out for that. And I had a feeling that I could do it, that I could get into it. And Gitanjali, who's now in Ananda, Italy, was the one directing that group and doing the auditions. And so she auditioned me, and I tried out and I sang a bit. And then I joined that group, and we began performing at Sunday services and different, the occasional event, like an orientation or something at Ananda Village.
Were you already playing guitar at that point?
I was just barely beginning. Biraj, Wayne Palmer, had a guitar that he wasn't using, so he sold it to me, and it was a 6-string, and I started, picking away at it a little bit. But no, it was some years before, 4 years before I was really good enough to do that.
Okay.
And but yeah, I did finally get out on one tour. We went out on it was not strictly Swamiji's music. We were singing Christmas music in Southern California.
Huh.
And so that was a small group. That was 4 of us, one on a part. Usually those groups were, 2 sopranos, an alto, tenor, and a bass. So we were at least 5, and sometimes more. Sometimes they would add a second alto. But we went with the bare minimum. There was no safety net. I even did a video on that recently called "No Safety Net," and that was one of the experiences of it. Going on a live TV program with 4 singers and 4 parts, and you're singing a cappella. It's like you don't. There's no place to go here. If you lose your part or you start coughing or whatever, it's everybody's going to see it. So
was the group acapella?
We sung a cappella. No, Jeff Rice played the guitar in that group.
Okay.
So it was Jeff Rice, Deborah Gitanjali, and Linda Wan and I. And
did the group have a name?
We called ourselves the Joy Singers.
Okay.
Yeah. And on the Christian TV stations, we were the Joy Singers. We didn't want to get the name Ananda caught up with it because, even though that was pre-internet, we figured that name would be strange enough that Christians wouldn't know what to do with it and would just raise red flags.
So that reminds me of an interesting period when Swami really wanted to get music out into the Christian churches and hoped that would spark something. Was that around that same time? Or?
It was, and I was taking the oratorio out to churches, first on the West Coast in California, and then later to the Chicago area. And yeah, it was a really interesting period because I did that for a year or more, a couple of years actually, around Christmas and around Easter, especially around Easter. And I remember coming to Swami after the second one of these, where I had been gone for like 6 weeks. Basically all of Lent, I was doing showings of the oratorio in the Chicago area. So that meant the slides, the soundtrack, the dissolve units, the screen, the projectors, the big speakers, the whole system was all there. And but I remember people loved it when we would get a crowd, a representative crowd. people loved that program. I mean, it was really moving. But I remember coming to Swami afterwards, telling him that, giving him kind of all the feedback, and but saying to him, but Swamiji, I'm not getting anybody to come to Ananda. And he said, oh, I never thought anybody would come to Ananda from it. And I was like, okay. I just was sort of shocked that I just somehow assumed that my mission was to be a secret agent and
Uh-huh.
somehow, spike the punch enough that people would go, so where are you really from? I want to come there and live like you people do. Or I don't know. But he really wanted to know, was his music he wanted to test his music
Oh.
in an audience that he couldn't reach in another way.
Oh.
And so we were part of his hands and feet to do that testing. And it was very important to him that it really touched people. There was a time when he changed the legal name of Ananda to the Fellowship of Intercommunion. And that was after the Yoga Fellowship, which was the first legal entity. And we could use that name. We could actually say we are the Fellowship of Intercommunion. And I would say, I would go to a Catholic priest and I would say, there's communion. Every Christian denomination has some kind of communion, be it wine, grape juice, whatever it is. So everybody's got some flavor of that. There's an inner communion that happens on a deeper level. I could say that to any Christian and they would nod and they would go, yep, that's really true now that you say it. Some of them had never probably thought of it before. But so I think he would have loved to see a richer, more dynamic dialogue among the churches with the movement of intercommunion. He really wanted us to be not just an organization, but kind of the initiators of a movement. Mm-hmm. And that movement would lead to intercommunion, which is to say meditation. That never really took off, but he was nudging and exploring and probing and testing the waters to see. It was in that era that Ananda, Italy was being born, and not long after that, I went and spent a year over in Italy myself as part of the development of that work. I wasn't at the leading end of it, but I was in the early stages of it, and guitars were starting to be used. The Festival of Light came along in that era, so yeah, he was exploring a lot as to where are the limits, how far can we bring Master into this arena and still have it be real, still have it feel enough like ours, and yet be meaningful to share with other people.
After all these years of playing the music, attuning to it, sharing, joyfully experiencing it, what do you want to share with people, whether they're newcomers or whether they're people that have been around for a while, just from your own perspective on what the music is, how to tune into it?
Many of us have heard the phrase that Swami used, if you want to know me, listen to my music. And a deeper level of that same thought came to me, which is if you want to feel his consciousness, not just kind of know him on an intellectual level or even a kind of an intuitive level, but to actually start to experience his consciousness, sing the music, actually move that music through your molecules. And I loved singing in a group. I would be moved sometimes to tears while singing Swamiji's music. And, just to be able to get so in tune with other people and to feel the changes that the music brought. And those changes don't happen immediately. It takes time. But Swamiji gave us a gift in this music that's just kind of beyond comprehension in a way, because there's just so much in it. There's so much nuance. and he was busy changing the words practically till he stepped off the planet. I mean, in the last few weeks, after the book with the lyrics in it got published, he changed all the words again. It's like, he just, anyway, it's incredible. But I mean, he just never stopped working on it. And working isn't even the right word, because for him it was a labor of love. It was just, he would hear it, he would feel it, and he would want to share it with people. And and so for me, it's just been a joy to play any role in that. You know, I kind of never cared. I mean, I wanted to sing in these groups because I could feel the energy there, and I loved how good they were. You know, the Joy Singers who toured before us, dang, they were good. I mean, it just was like, ooh. You know, they would come back from a tour and they would give a concert at Ananda Village, and I would park myself in the front row.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a groupie for Jeannie's group, you know, when she came back on one of those tours, and they all sang. I mean, they were tight. They
Yeah.
were so good. Oh man, it was just amazing.
Agreed.
So I just aspired to that, and anyway,
Yep.
just deeply moving. So I'm thrilled to see singers from all over the world. You know, when the movies came along in 2011, 12, 13, and you know, Swami sang Brothers, that segued into, you know, the group singing, and then the group in Assisi singing, and then the group in India singing. Oh my God! I mean, that's just the beginning of a wave to me that should go all the way around the world. And so it's just a gift and a blessing, and I'm just grateful to have been a part of it. And you know, thanks for probing questions, and I hope this is of interest and value to people. Um,
Absolutely beautiful. I'm
yeah.
honored that you would take the time, and it's been great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real treat.
All right, my friend. Blessings.
Okay, Haribol.